Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, Deku fanfic with another fiction. What if Deku journey to Drageria? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. People of Japan, hear me. I am Takabana, the Dark God, and I come to you with a message. Rather, I come to you with an offer. To all of those who feel useless, downtrodden, rejected, hated, or ostracized by your current standing society, I extend an olive branch of peace to you in your time of need. If you feel as though your current life is all for naught here in Japan, then I ask you to join me in my country, the country of Drageria. I ask that you come of your own free will and not by any sort of force. Take only what you need and leave all else behind. In time you will regain what you have left and more in Drageria. Come and start a new life, one free of judgment and pressure, if that is what you seek. Go to your nearest docking system and go to any boat captain and whisper the word Evlolian, and they will take you to Drageria with no charge or payment. I hope to see you there. It was the middle of the night, and Izuku Midoriya heard a strange voice booming to him and echoing through the air. It sounded like the voice would come from outside with such gusto. But even as he threw open the window, it still sounded no different. Almost as if someone was speaking through his mind. Izuku wasn't sure he was still awake, but he knew the strange voice was all too real. Several of his neighbors were also awake, their lights turning on in a frenzy at the sound of the voice, some of which went outside to explore. But as this was going on, Izuku recounted what the strange voice said to him. Its offer. Was it real? It couldn't be. There was no way something like that existed. It had to be a trap. No one in their right mind could ever believe in something so unreal. Then Izuku remembered. He remembered what had happened not too long ago. It was only just the previous day that it happened. The worst day of his life. The one that almost caused him to snap, but instead run away. The day had started on its trail of horror on his way to school, with bystanders and people who knew him, giving him sideways glances of disgust or pity for being one of the few people in the world classified as quirkless. His class had gone no different than any other day, with students and teachers all whispering about him or snickering about him behind his back. And things hadn't been crazy after that, which was a relief for him. Then things only went downhill from there, as his previous best friend Bakugo told him to kill himself if he wanted to be a hero so badly, and hoped to get a quirk, destroyed his notebook, and decked him with his quirk in the stomach. Things got no better on his way home when he was attacked by a slime thing that got within speaking distance of killing him. Luckily, he was saved by All Might, who gave him his autograph and bounced away. But Izuku held on to him and wanted to ask an important question. A decision that he not only would come to regret but hate himself for. When he asked if he could be a hero, despite being quirkless, All Might simply turned away from him and told him no, and to lose his unreal dream. When All Might vanished, he left Izuku on that rooftop with the most shell-shocked expression anyone could muster. Then things got even worse once he made his way back to the streets and was met with the sight of Bakugo being held hostage by the same slime thing. Feeling responsible, he ran out to try and save him, and almost managed to do so. But the angry expression and list of slanders that were thrown at him made him halt, and the slime thing took advantage, nearly suffocating both boys, only for All Might to save them with one blow. When they were free, the first thing Bakugo did was try and attack him for saving him, leaving a black mark on his right eye. When the heroes peeled them apart, instead of being helped by the other heroes present, he was instead treated like a criminal, being questioned, harassed, and treated roughly for no reason. He tried to look to All Might for help, trying to get the man to call them off, but he did nothing. Without even facing the boy, he told him off, albeit in a much kinder way, for trying to get involved in hero work while not having a quirk on top of things. Izuku was devastated at his words and felt himself tear up, only to hear the hero, roughly holding his wrist, harass him for his involvement with no quirk and very loudly, which only got the crowd of people's attention and cause them to snicker or make demeaning side comments at him, some even laughing at him. Izuku was crushed beyond repair and pulled against the hero, begging him to let him go. To get away from the humiliation, the sadness, to just get away. But the hero wouldn't let go, only putting more and more pressure till he nearly crushed the boy's hand, who was now just screaming in pain. The heroes had gotten annoyed with this and smacked Izuku hard across the face, leaving a red welt and freeing him from their vice grip. Izuku tumbled to the ground and tried to scamper away as the hero approached him while, no doubt continuing with his beating. But fortunately he was held back by other heroes. Izuku scampered to his feet and grabbed the first thing he could from his shredded mess of a backpack before running off with haste, pushing through the crowds of jostling and laughing people as he ran for dear life. He ran and ran and ran and ran until he finally made it to his front door, where he collapsed in a dry, heaving mess. He wanted to lay there and cry, but he couldn't. Not now. There was only one person who could console him in his most desperate hour of need, and she was just on the other side of this door. Luckily, he still had his house key, apart from everything else he lost, and unlocked the door. He stepped in and took off his shoes while placing his keys in the dish by the door and weakly let out his arrival. No doubt his mom would ask him what happened to him, all teary-eyed, but now it was the time to tell her the truth. The truth of what had been happening to him outside the house. He knew his mom would cry, but then she would do everything to help him. No doubt they'd have to move and start over because of everything that has happened to him, which Izuku would be grateful for. But it'd be worth it in the end. When he walked into the kitchen, his mom immediately saw his state of being and was shocked unsurprisingly. He couldn't hold it in any longer and told her about everything. He must have stood there for an hour telling her all the things he had been holding back and nearly on the verge of tears every time. When he finally finished, breathless and very relieved, he half expected his mom to throw herself into him, cry, hug, and kiss him, then tell him everything would be fine now. But she didn't. Instead, she just stared at him for several seconds before dropping her head and looking off to the side. This sent a ping of fear through his spine as he anticipated waiting for her to say something. After a long and anxious wait, she finally spoke, and the words she said broke the final straw. She told him that he would just have to deal with all that he's been through. This is what his life would look like from now on. He would just have to accept it and move on while keeping quiet. But he couldn't. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't stay quiet. And most of all, he couldn't live like this anymore. Especially since there was nothing left to live for. Every opportunity he had was now gone. He would be less than nothing. Tears rolled down Izuku's swollen face as he looked at the woman who he thought of as his mother, now an unrecognizable stranger. He took a step away from her, then another. His shoulders jumped and his breath hitched, and then he turned on his heels and ran out the front door and into the city. Even if his mother did try and call out to him or stop him, he couldn't hear her, and she couldn't keep up. Izuku didn't know what to do, but the only thing he could think of was to run. And run he did. He ran and ran and ran and ran until he nearly collapsed. The only thing propelling him through the city was his fears, sadness, and thoughts. He couldn't go back to school. He couldn't face his classmates or Bakugo. He couldn't follow his dream. He couldn't go into town. He couldn't even go home. He had no one in this world, and no one wanted him. He was alone. And so he only ran until he felt like he was far away from everything that nailed him. But even as he laid on the ground dry, heaving once again, it still didn't feel far enough. He laid on the cold concrete and cried. He cried and cried and cried until he had no more tears to shed. He finally sat up and saw that in his hasty escape from his home, he had nothing with him. Just his school uniform and his notebook that he still clung onto. He had no phone, no money, not even any shoes, just nothing. He opened his half-destroyed notebook and almost cried again as the pages stuck and ripped apart. Several of the pages had been destroyed from ripping. More had been burned to a crisp. while most of the words were just waterlogged, making nothing readable. As he flipped through the pages, he found only one that was intact. The autograph from All Might. Tears emerged again as he saw the man's name, a teasing reminder of his failure and nothing more. With anger and sadness as his guide, he ripped out the one good piece of paper and then angrily tore it to shreds while screaming until it couldn't be torn anymore. He threw the paper shreds into the wind where they scattered all over. When Izuku finally looked at his surroundings, he saw that he was in the lower parts of the city and right by an abandoned motel with a lot of homeless camping not too far. At least he could sleep here until he thought of something to do. Luckily, the doors were not locked, and he went right into one of the rooms where he found what could have been the nicest and cleanest bed. He flopped down on it, not caring about dirt, germs, or bugs, and drifted off to sleep. Or he did for about an hour, until he heard the mysterious voice call out to him through the air, his room, and his head. Izuku looked up into the sky where the voice was, or where he thought it was, and thought about it. It sounded unreal, but then again, when was anything he said, done, or existed forever seems real to others? And from the looks of his homeless neighbors, it seems like they too were taking up the offer. Packing what little they had and marched off to the docks. Izuku knew that if this was real, then it was his only chance, and so he took it. With the notebook still in his hands, he climbed out the window and joined the other homeless folk to the docks. They all walked into the inner city, where they somehow met up with an even larger group of people that all looked like they were headed toward the docks as well. He could figure that much out due to the fact they all were packing lightly and headed in the same direction. While taking a small detour down an alleyway, his leg suddenly collides with something. He fell straight onto his face, and after picking himself up, he saw that he landed on the things that hit him. Much to his surprise, he saw a young girl, no older than 8, with long white hair, red eyes, and a small horn growing out from the right side of her forehead. She wore an old-looking white shirt with holes and stains on it, alongside the fact she was covered in scars. Izuku felt his heart bleed out from the girl, who looked desperate and terrified. He reached out a hand, but the girl scurried back from him. Izuku retrieved his hand and said through the welt on his face, "It's okay. I won't hurt you. Are you lost?" The girl's eyes began to water, and before he knew it, she fell into his chest and wept bitterly into him while sobbing. "Please help me. He's coming. He'll find me soon." Izuku was more than confused, but asked back, "Who's coming?" The girl sniffed back and managed to squeak out, "The bad man with the bird mask." "Bad man? Bird mask?" Izuku questioned to himself. He then asked her, "Where are your parents?" The girl said nothing in return. "Do you have parents?" This time she shook her head no. Izuku knew that he couldn't just leave her or take her to the authorities. He had one chance to escape this hell, and it looked like he was taking this girl with him. Izuku sighed and scooped the girl into his arms while joining the crowds of people once again. "Don't worry, I'll take you with me," he said kindly to the girl, who looked up at him with watery eyes. "Where are we going?" she asked him innocently. "Somewhere far away. Somewhere no one can hurt us. Somewhere the bad man with the bird mask can't find you," he told her reassuringly while trying to smile. The small girl looked up at him in wonder and asked, "Really? Really?" He told her. He then remembered something and asked her, "By the way, what's your name?" "Eri." Eri replied in a relaxed tone while snuggling into his shoulder. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Eri," he told her while petting her head. Meanwhile, in the same dark alleyway a few minutes later, 2 figures stood in the darkness looking for something but ended up coming up with nothing. They both took notice of the large crowd of people moving in the same direction and looked on from their hiding spot, trying to spot someone in the crowds. When that was fruitless, the first person, who was dressed like a plague doctor, turned to his associate and prompted him with a question. "Do you think we should join the crowd and follow them, boss?" No doubt she hid in there, the plague doctor asked him while attempting to move with the crowd. However, he was stopped by the other man, who wore a large fur-collared parka and large beak-like mask. He put his hand out and said with a cool and sinister tone, "No doubt indeed, but there's no need." The plague doctor gave a confused noise and asked further, "What? Why? She's super important to our cause. Losing her would be a huge hit for us, Boss Chisaki." The man, Chisaki, adjusted his glove and replied with a calm tone that hid an angry ping where Trent, "Yes, but let's not forget we are to keep as low a profile as possible. Our mission, although important, cannot be compromised. We'll find her again, given time. But for now, we can continue with the samples we have. How is progress?" "We're in the testing stages right now and have yielded very little fruit," the plague doctor replied, a bit nervous. Chiaki gave an annoyed growl before saying in a controlled tone, "No matter. All progress is good progress. Make sure to use the resources properly, or we'll have to do something drastic regarding that girl's location." "Yes, sir," the plague doctor said nervously. Back with Izuku, he had been walking with a large crowd of people with a sleeping Eri in one arm and a notebook in the other for over 20 minutes. And in that time he had finally made it to the docks where a large cargo ship, void of any cargo boxes, was sitting in port, almost like it was waiting for them, alongside several smaller vessels. The main body of the crowd was boarding the cargo ship, and Izuku decided that would be the best place to go. As he walked up the ramp in a single file line with the rest of the people, he saw that every person that came onto the ship was greeted by the captain and the crew who looked strange. Not different strange, just weird strange. Their eyes seemed glossed over and body limp, almost as if they were hypnotized. Every time a person passed by they would say that magic word they were instructed to say when finding a vessel to cross the ocean. When it finally came to Izuku, the captain looked at him, as if expecting something, then remembered the word he needed and clearing his throat, he whispered to the Captain Evloian. The captain tipped his hat and Izuku came on board. After almost a full hour of people boarding the ship, it was quite literally packed to the gills, with most people having to stand just from how little room there was. Izuku managed to sit amongst the crowds, and after another hour of waiting, the ship blew its fog horns and finally departed from the shore. Unfortunately, the noise woke poor Eri into a fearful frenzy. Izuku managed to soothe her and get her to calm down enough until she fell asleep again, much to Izuku's envy. He wished he could be sleeping right now. And according to the many tired faces of the other passengers, they were all wishing the same thing as well. But Izuku stood strong and held Eri far into the night and up until it was morning. When morning's first light came up, so did Eri. They looked around somewhat confused and scared. When she looked at Izuku with fright, he knew she must only remember very little from the night before. So he reassured her everything was fine and told her about the night before. Eri relaxed, and then said to him in a whine, "I'm thirsty, Izuku." Izuku sighed and replied, while looking up at the sky, "So am I, Eri." The morning turned into the middle of the afternoon with the sun now beating down on them, and people were starting to get rightfully antsy. Even Izuku was starting to get a bit stir-crazy from lack of food, water, space, and sleep. But after another hour of waiting and some people starting to lose it, or thinking it was some kind of ruse, the foghorns blared and one person on the ship shouted, "Land ho!" Everyone looked in the direction of the bow of the ship and saw that the person was right, much to everyone's instant relief. A few miles away was an island that poked out from the horizon. Everyone on board cheered at the sight, and even Izuku couldn't hold in his excitement. It took another 2 hours to get to the island and dock safely. Then another hour to make sure the ships were properly in place and unload everyone one by one. Finally on shore, Izuku couldn't help but gawk and marvel at the swell everything. The whole place was just so beautiful. From the top of the ship's deck, Izuku could see that the island was covered in greenery, with huge cascades of forests on both sides and a huge mountain in the center, or what he thought was the center. In addition, it looked as though a castle was built into the mountain, making use of its natural shape. There was even a huge staircase that ran on 3 sides of the front. On land, there was so much to see it was honestly overwhelming at first. Their docking system was huge and stuck far out from the actual shoreline, with docks that could take small ships to the huge cargo ship Izuku arrived on. In addition, several houses were built onto the dock, like a mini village on the water. There were homes, open stalls for business, and outdoor entertainment. All the people looked so much different from the ones he's seen in Japan. Not only because of their quirks, but they all seemed to come from different parts of the world. They all wore ornate clothing that looked to be handmade and not from some bland big-name company. In addition, they all seemed generally happy, unlike the many unhappy or stressed faces of individuals that he saw walking down the streets or talking on phones. Everyone here just seems to be less stressed and tense and gives an aura of kindness. Izuku never had felt so at peace, even when no one looked at him like they did back home. Some seemed nervous around him, but then again he did look like crap, and he just got off a boat with several dozen other people that were obstructing much of what was going on. But most just smiled or waved at him if he looked their way. They didn't whisper or give sour expressions. There was no judgment or pity behind their eyes, which was a complete shell shock for him to see and express, though it made him feel good at the same time. As he was admiring the scene of the docking living, he heard a voice call from the air. "Excuse me, can I have everyone's attention?" Everyone looked up and saw a woman with bat wings for arms flying above them. "For all those of you who just came from Japan, will you please follow me so we can take an accounting of you?" The women then flew off further into the island, and everyone followed after the flying women. After a time of following, Izuku took notice of the village further on the island itself. The houses were built very old-fashioned and simple, with long rectangular bodies made from deep brown wood and white trim. The roofs had very gentle slopes with metal singes and were built up in 3 stories. Each story seems to be its own home for 3 different families living there, much like an apartment. Some of the homes were single-floor houses, and many more were under construction. In addition, there were storefronts and other places of business and entertainment. Fresh food, flowers, and spices all invaded his senses, while Eri seemed to be turned off by the overstimulated smells. Laughter, chatter, and music hit his ears with a sense of joy, and not a high-energy cluster like the city. The streets were made from beautiful slabs of marble with a fountain at the center, and street lights that appeared to be powered by electricity. The whole place, even though it looked like a medieval fantasy village, seemed to have many modern amenities like electricity, running water, and proper waste disposal, which was a huge relief for Izuku. After following the crowds, they finally made it to a huge white tent that spanned for hundreds of literal yards in all directions. But even then, once he got inside, he saw it was still so crowded. Huge groups of people all over and 2 huge lines that stretched out to a single table with 2 people recording info on them. Chairs all around with people either sitting or trying to find a seat. After what felt like hours of waiting, Izuku finally made it to the front, where he saw 2 people writing in large books. He walked up to the one on the right, which was the same Batwoman from before, and asked, "Name?" "Izuku Midoriya." Izuku replied without stuttering. "Age?" 15. "Status?" "I what?" Izuku asked, confused. "What were you before you came here?" "Working, married, homeless, act," she clarified. Student," Izuku responded as she wrote it down while turning a page. "And who's this?" she asked while motioning to Eri. "This is Eric. She's 8, and not in school," Izuku told her. The woman wrote it all down before asking, "Oh, before I forget, what's your quirk?" This made Izuku shudder violently. He hadn't been here for more than 5 minutes, and he was already going to be ostracized yet again. The woman saw his reaction and told him, "Wait, if it's personal I understand, but we need to take account of it in case there's a job you want that'll be best suited to your advantage, even if it's something ridiculous." Izuku knew that made sense. They needed to know the basics of what they could and couldn't do. The ones most suited for a specific job would excel in it. And the fact that this country looked like it was still in development meant that they needed to take full advantage of what they had. Izuku swallowed a painful gulp and then whimpered out, "I'm quirkless," then closed his eyes for the imminent berating to come next. There was hard silence for a few seconds before the woman suddenly exclaimed, "Wow, really?" He popped open his eyes and looked at her smiling face with confusion. "That's super cool. I should introduce you to my friend and his kids. They are also quirks." Izuku continues to look at the woman in shock as she continues. "I didn't think we would get any more. I half expected all quirkless people to either be dead or old. You must have an interesting perspective of the world without a quirk. I kind of wish I had that pleasure and not have to look like a gross bat," she said while moving to her many bat-like features. Izuku was flabbergasted and couldn't bring himself to speak. All he felt was a rush of different emotions all at once: shock, confusion, happiness, and anger. The anger part was mostly for saying that she wanted his perspective. But he couldn't completely fault her since she didn't know him or what he had been through. She then looked to Eri and asked, "And what's your quirk?" Eri hesitated for a minute and finally piped her up and replied, "Rewind." "And what does it do?" Eri just stayed silent. "Maybe we'll find out another time," she said awkwardly. She wrote something down and then asked, "Now then, do you two have any parents with you?" Izuku fidgeted anxiously in his socks as he replied, "No, we're here by ourselves." "Oh, poor things. Another set of orphans. Go ahead and move to the small group of other children you see on the left," she told them while pointing in the direction of a group of children of varying ages. Izuku, after thanking the woman, walked over to the group and took a seat with Eri in his lap. He looked around at all the people there with him, and they all appeared to be as emotionally and physically drained as he felt. They all looked miserable, but also relieved. When one of them tried to make eye contact, he immediately darted his eyes away, not at all feeling social. When he could finally feel his legs again, he heard a new voice call out, "Attention everyone. We have drinks and snacks for you after your travels. Please come up and take what you need. There's plenty for everyone." Eri looked up at Izuku and said, "I'm thirsty, Izuku." Izuku chuckles and says, "So am I. Come on, let's get something." Izuku picked Eri back into his arms and walked over to the now overcrowded long table with people getting provisions. After a long while of waiting, Izuku finally managed to get 4 bottles of colored water and 2 paper lunch bags. He went back to his seat, sat down with Eren on his lap, and opened the first bottle and handed it to Eri, who eagerly drank it. Izuku opened another bottle for himself and drank it down with equal gusto. He licked his lips at the sweet and cold taste. It was just normal water, but sweetened with fruit and honey. Eri also voiced her pleasure for the drink and asked for another. Izuku opened the third bottle and handed it to her. After Eri was drinking, he opened one of the paper bags and examined its contents. Inside the bag was a fruit, some bagged berries, a trail mix protein bar, and a small sandwich composed of cheese, lettuce, tomato, and some kind of meat. At this point, Eri had downed her drink happily and was now browsing the bag. Izuku took out the berries and gave them to Eri, who picked at them one by one. Izuku took the other fruit, which was a pear, and ate it. After both were done, Izuku took the trail mix bar and sandwich and broke both in half. The two of them then ate their food constantly. After they finished, Izuku went to grab the last drink and paper bag to share, but he stopped when he saw a shadow over him. He looked up and saw another of the children in the group standing over him with a deadpan but sour expression. He was a bit taller than Izuku, but nearly as scrawny as him. He had shaggy purple hair that stuck out on all sides and deep dark bags under his purple eyes. Izuku didn't say it aloud, but this guy looked like the embodiment of sleep deprivation. He was about to say something to the other teen when he spoke up first and asked, "What you got there?" Izuku was confused for a moment, but then replied, "A rations bag. It has." Izuku immediately froze up mid-sentence and lost all control of his body. He was still very aware, but the connection to his body seemed to be put on autopilot. He was somewhat freaked out and wondered what happened. His eyes, being the only thing he could move, looked at the teen and put together that he must have some kind of quirk that was doing this. But the real question was, why was he doing this? What did he have to gain from Izuku? The teen gave a sideways smile and answered his question as he told him, "Given your foodstuff." Without, his body started to move on its own. He leaned down and picked up the bottle and bag, then prepared to hand it over to him. Much to his dismay, even Eri could see something was wrong with Izuku and his blank expression. She was scared at first, trying to get Izuku's attention by calling his name. But the more he didn't respond, the louder and more bold she got until she lightly slapped his face. With this new sensation, Izuku was suddenly snapped back to self-control. He shook himself and dropped the bag and drink before the guy could snag it. Just as he was about to ask what happened, another person stood between him and the purple guy who was trying to pull a fast one for the food on the ground. The guy standing between him and his defense was another teen around his age with sharp teeth, red eyes, and hair that looked like it was being dyed from black to red. He nearly growled at the purple boy and exclaimed, "What the heck, man? Using your quirk to steal food from some guy and his little sister. Super unmanly. Don't you have any shame?" The purple kid clicked his tongue and said, "Buzz off. This doesn't concern you." The sharp-toothed boy was about to respond, but Izuku stopped him, saying, "No, don't respond or he'll control you." The sharp-toothed boy looked back at him, and after a confused moment, he nodded silently while glaring the purple boy down. The two of them were on a near Western-style standoff until another voice induced and added her 2 cents. "I can't help but find it rather abhorrent to see someone as old and seemingly mature as you go so far as to misuse their quirk for personal gain, especially in the form of theft from two innocents when the said object of your desire is quite literally being given out for free," said the new female who walked into the standoff, making it a triangle. She was tall, very tall, taller than either of the boys. Her hair was black, long, and brought up into a ponytail with onyx-colored eyes. She was also very developed in some particular areas. Although she appeared, presented, and acted mature, Izuku could tell she was no older than the rest of them. "Oh great, another. Get lost, girly." The purple boy scoffed in a bored tone, only to get a humph in return. "Hey, what's your problem anyway? You heard the girl and the person from before. Those food bags are for free. So why even bother stealing?" the sharp-toothed guy asked incredulously. The purple guy aggravatedly clicked his tongue and said, while looking away, "TCH, you wouldn't understand." He then balled his fists and yelled at them, "None of you would." At this point, a small crowd had gathered at all the commotion, and even some Dragerian guards began to inch closer. The purple teen saw them and yelled at the crowd, "What are you all looking at?" The crowd jumped back and the guards pressed forward to stop any conflict. The purple teen whipped his head back to Izuku, the sharp-toothed guy, and the girl, and half yelled, "You don't know what it's like to be me. You could never imagine. And why should he get to take more than one?" The sharp-toothed guy narrows his eyes at him, like it was obvious, and says back rhetorically, "He has a little sister, dude. She needs to eat too. And the lady before said they're more than enough. They just keep bringing out more. You didn't think that they would simply refuse service to you specifically, did you?" the tall girl asks the purple guy with some concern in her tone, making the sharp-toothed boy raise a concerned eyebrow in her direction. "They would if they knew about me. Everyone would hate me if they knew. The purple guy replied vaguely, leading to more concern on both their faces. Knew about what? Nobody knows anything about anyone here. Izuku finally piped up. While standing from his seat with Eri in his arms, the purple guy snapped at him and yelled, "My quirk, damn it. If people knew about the nature of my quirk, they'd all reject me, and I'd be back to where I was before I came to this place. God, this was a mistake." He immediately shrunk down and deflated while wiping his hands over his face. At this point, Izuku really couldn't be mad at him. Just the other day he was this guy. Far less angry. But still, he's been through a lot, and it's making it harder for him to move on or change from what he considered normal. And the way things were looking, it may just go that way for him if someone didn't try to step up and change that. But no one made a move to do so. Instead, he decided to change that. So he picked up the drink and bag, walked past the sharp-toothed boy, and held out the items for the purple guy while saying, "Here." The purple guy looked up from his hands and saw the gesture. He didn't grab it immediately and just looked at it. Then to Izuku as he asked, "Well, I know what that's like. To be hated, ostracized, ignored, singled out, never given a chance. All because of something you can't control. I know full well what that's like," Izuku said while sadly looking at the ground before continuing. But that's why we're all here, isn't it? For a fresh start, and maybe even a second chance for some of us. Why continue to stay in the past when the future is now?" Izuku said to him with a smile. So manly. The sharp-toothed boy said, while he clenched his fists and shed a tear. You'd still give this to me? Even after We all get angry, and we all make mistakes. The trick is just not to repeat them. We all deserve a second chance no matter what," Izuku told him reassuringly. "And besides, I can just do some more. I just have to stand in line for an hour holding an 8-year-old child in my arms." He followed up with a sarcastic joke. Even the purple-haired guy couldn't help but smirk at the joke while taking the food. "Thank you," he finally said in a small voice. Seeing the scene de-escalate so quickly, the guards backed off and returned to their posts. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." Izuku introduced himself while holding out his hand. After a brief hesitation, the purple boy finally introduced himself. "Hitoshi Shinso. Sorry about that. I'm not used to kindness." He apologized. "Join the club," Izuku sassed back. "And this is Eri." He introduced Eri. Shinso could only muster a creepy smile and small wave in return, only to have Eri hide her face in his shoulder, much to Shinso's dismay. "Well, you can't blame her. You didn't exactly make a good first impression," the sharp-toothed boy pointed out. "If you're going to continue to butt into this conversation, then at least introduce yourself." Shinso sassed him back. "Yeah, I guess you're right. The name's Ijiro Kirishima." Kirishima introduced himself after awkwardly rubbing his head. Shinso then looked over to the tall girl and said to her, "Hey girlie. If you're going to stand here too, then you might as well join in on the introduction sequence." The girl made another hump sound and stated firmly, "My name isn't girlie, it's Momo Yaoyorozu." She then made a face like she hadn't meant to say that. The wheels turned in Kirishima's head, and he finally blurted out, "Wait, Yaoyorozu. As in Yaoyorozu Industries, the biggest name in a half of Japan." Momo then slapped both hands over his mouth and said in a small voice, Yes, but please don't bring attention to it." "Why are you here of all places? You're filthy, stinking rich," Izuku asked. Momo shuffled uncomfortably where she stood as she explained, "It's not that simple. All my life has been like one big upstanding business model. There's a time and date for everything, leaving no room for last-minute anything. Always preen and proper. Act a certain way, eat a certain way, dress a certain way, speak a certain way. It always felt so." She trailed off. "Hollow, shallow, not the real deal." Shinso listed off several things. Momo nods and replies, "Yes, all of that." It felt smothering, she said with a sad and uncomfortable tone while fidgeting. She then took a deep breath as she explained, "But the real reason I decided to abandon everything I had was due to my dream." "Dream?" Izuku repeated. Momo looked up at the sky longingly, which was just the tent, and explained, "Ever since I was a little girl, I always dreamed of being a hero. But my parents wanted nothing of it. They wanted me to take up the family business and—" She trailed off again. "And?" Shinso prompted her. "And they wanted my quirk." She finally spat out, making the boy's eyes widen. "They wanted to see what happens in my body to make it work. Then they wanted to transfer it to a machine that could do the same." She looked at the ground with a deep depression over her. "Not to be rude, but what is your quirk?" Izuku asked, trying not to get excited. Momo fidgeted again and replied, "It's called creation. It allows me to take fat cells from my body and change their atomic structure to create inorganic items." She then demonstrated by creating a pencil that came from a multicolored light on her hand. Izuku could hold it back as he excitedly exclaimed, "That's incredible. You would have made an awesome hero." He then stopped his excitement as he realized and followed up asking, "But why'd you stop?" Momo sighs sadly and explained, "Because when I took an interest, I'd always be turned down or yelled at. Even when I tried on my own, they'd do everything to sabotage any chance I had. I just felt trapped. Then that dark god guy's voice invaded your head and you left." Shinso wrapped it all up, with Momo giving a nod. Kirishima sighs while rubbing the back of his hair and says, "Boy, I sure do know a thing or two about being told things I can't do." "So what is your sob story not so red?" Shinso asks with a snarky tone. Kirishima laughed dryly as he said, "Funny thing, it does stem from this." He motioned to his half-dyed hair. He then twisted his fingers nervously as he explained further. "I was made fun of a lot for my hair, my looks, and personality. My quirk played a big part in it. Everyone always told me, including my parents, that I'd never been a hero with the quirk I had. I'd just be one of the eternal sidekicks if I was lucky. Not even recognizable because of it. I tried to change, but my parents stopped me midway through dyeing my hair, sent me to school, and everyone saw what I tried to do and laughed. Even the teachers." He said the last sentence with a deep sadness. "My quirk is not so flashy. It was also hard for me to control, which is where I got these scars." He finished while pointing to his scars. "What's your quirk?" Shinso blurted out. Kirishima then held out his arm, and it turned into a rocky surface, then explained, "Hardening. It just lets me turn my body into a stone-like surface." "What a quirk, Purple, since you haven't gone." Shinso rolled his eyes at the failed attempt to tease him and replied, "It's Shinso and brainwashing." All the teens looked at one another in confusion, then back to Shinso, where Momo said what they were all thinking. "That's the worst name possible for a quirk." "You're telling me," Shinso said, while rolling his eyes and grinding his teeth. Kirishima then turned to Izuku and asked with a somewhat cheerful tone, "So what is your story, Midoriya? How do you and your sister get to be like this?" He motioned to Iri and Izuku's state of being. Between his wet, tattered, burnt uniform, visible facial injuries, and lack of shoes, he didn't look like a pristine picture. Then there was Iri, whose hair was long and unkempt, her eyes dark and red, her only seeming form of clothing being a long white shirt, and the multiple scars all over her body that even Izuku didn't notice at first. Izuku moved uncomfortably in the spot he stood and eventually replied, "I'd rather not say." There was silence for a few seconds until Kirishima said, "Hey bro, that cool. You don't have to feel like you should tell us." Momo nods in agreement and says, "We are practically strangers to one another. I'm not even sure why we all just shared our backstories so easily." Shinso clicks his tongue in a non-aggravated way and says while rubbing his head, "I guess it's just nice to have someone who listens and doesn't berate or judge you." All three of the teens nodded with his statement, and from there on the four of them felt the spark of a friendship blooming. However, things did not stay so peacefully as Eri audibly gasped loud and sharp. All eyes were on her as she violently trembled in Izuku's arms, holding on to him for dear life. "Eri, what's wrong?" Izuku immediately takes notice as Eri's eyes are glued to one place. "It's him," she squeaks out in a trembling tone. "Who?" Momo asks, petting the girl's head to calm her. "The bad man with the bird mask, he's here," she nearly yells while hiding her face in Izuku's shoulders. Izuku quickly whipped his eyes around trying to look for the bird masked man and immediately saw a tall man standing in the census line. He looked rather unremarkable apart from the prominent bird beak he had for a mouth. Izuku was confused for a moment and began to ask Eri while still looking around, "Where? You don't mean that?" Before he got to finish, Eri cut in and begged him on the verge of tears. "Don't let him take me, Izuku. Don't let him. I don't want to go back. I don't." Then she froze mid-sentence and panicked. Izuku and the other three teens were severely unnerved by this, and Izuku gently tried to ask her, "Eri?" Eri suddenly let out a scream like a murderer victim. Izuku was so shocked by this that he didn't even register Eri freeing herself from his arms and falling to the ground. "Eri!" Izuku yelled in panic while trying to grab her again. But Eri ran away from him as she screamed, "No, don't touch me. My curse. My curse is back. Ah." Eri then kicked her head into an unused chair, and the item suddenly turned into a pile of different-sized logs. Everyone who said this gasped and tried to move away from her, as she just sat there screaming and crying. Eri was the only thing Izuku could manage to see when everything happened. His breath waxed fast and sweat was running down him as his mind raced. He didn't know what to do. He felt useless. So he did the only thing he could in that situation and yelled, "Help! Someone, please help! Something is wrong with her. She needs help. Anyone." But no one made a move. Even his new acquaintances were keeping their distance, but looking like they were trying to find a way to help. Izuku looked around beggingly for someone's aid. But the guards were trying to move the people away who were trying to move close, and once were close enough were trying to back away. Izuku felt like he was not only useless, but helpless and stupid as he watched the poor girl sit on the ground screaming and crying as a red glow emitted from the full-grown horn on her head. Izuku almost started crying there, feeling as though he could do nothing else until a loud and forceful voice cut through. "Everyone clear a path. I said clear a path, people," yelled the voice as four much different-looking guards opened the crowd of people. "Lord Takabana is coming through." The voice yelled again as a huge and imposing figure looked into the area, which made the crowd diverge even faster. A sense of dread and fear swept around all corners of the tent and invaded Izuku's senses. His fear and desperation for another had quickly changed to fear and desperation for his well-being as the figure strode in confidently. Only the person in question wasn't a person at all. No, instead, it was. Well, Izuku couldn't quite put it into words since it was so anomalous looking. But it is feared the only thing he could do was stare into the creature's multiple eyes. On seeing all the commotion, the creature appeared to bend over towards Izuku and ask in a voice that sounded ancient and powerful, "What seems to be the problem?"